Awesome. All right. Welcome, everyone. And so, yeah, we're hanging around on page 77 and we're diving in to step 9, which is, I don't know, for many of us, this might not feel, oh, you know what I got to do? I forgot to mute everyone with love. 1 second, you are all muted, but with love. Sorry, it was too many buttons, too much to do, and I forgot. All right, so we're diving into step 9, which genuinely is a really exciting part of the 12 steps. And for those of you who maybe are familiar or not familiar with the 9th step, you might be like, exciting is maybe not the word for it. Terrifying. Well, just a factually interesting piece of information that fear and excitement feel the same in the body. So we'll just have an embodied experience. It'll be great. But last week, as we were diving into step 8, we were talking about how 8 and 9 work together. And that's so important, at least that I found. You know, for me, there were those times where I would create that list and then look at it and get so overwhelmed. But as I've worked with other people and we've worked on the list and making amends together, building that momentum, we've found that there is a beautiful flow and that we're able to build and maintain that momentum. It's a little like diving into the deep end. Just dive on in and let's get to it. So, first and foremost, I want to talk about the word amend, because so many of us come to the rooms, come to Alcoholics Anonymous, and we have that feeling, oh, no, I can't make amends. I just burnt my life to the ground, and I just told them sorry 100,000 times. But who's counting? They are. They're counting. And what I want to emphasize is that the word amend does not mean sorry. The word amend is to repair, to make right, to restore. I have a 1930s dictionary, and because I'm fun, I read that. I mean, I look things up. I'm not like having a casual peruse of the 1930s dictionary, but don't put it past me, you know? And in my 1930s dictionary, amend means to free from fault, to improve, to correct. So what we're trying to do in the amends process is not, I'm sorry. And I will say, as a Canadian, it is the stereotype. And so it's not the end of the world if a story sneaks out into an amends. But the amends is really about repairing, restoring, and making right. And at the very top of page 77, it spoke about one of the reasons in which we need to make amends and the real purpose of making amends. I spoke about this last week, but we'll talk about it here again now. On page 77, it's the very top of the page, and we're just going to go 3 sentences down, where it says our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. And that is the purpose of amends, so that I can be fit into this position of service for God and the people about me. And it's, hey, wait a minute. When did I decide that I was going to be fit into something? What are you talking about? And I decided that in step 3. The reason we are making amends is so that we can have this spiritual awakening. And in so doing, we can be of greater use to God and the people about us. And last week, I always tell this because it's true, but it's also a joke, where it's like I'll work with sponsees and they're like, I'm willing to make amends because I know it's about me. It's not about them. And I don't say anything because they're willing to make amends. So why would I say anything? I'm just going to let them think that and go make the amends. And then I work with others that are like, I'm willing to make amends because I know it's about me, and it's not about me, it's about them. And I don't say anything because I'm like, listen, I'm not going to be pedantic. If you're going to make your amends, I don't care why, go make it. And so on page 77, what we were talking about a little bit was about making the approach. And that is the first step towards amends. Now, I'm just going to share the screen for those that are a little bit more visual. I have the sort of steps in the amends process outlined. And as always, I will make the documents available. So the first step in the amends process is what's known as the approach. And that's what it's talking about on the first part of page 77, the first approach. I need to approach them. And so what that looks like is booking a time and explaining what I'm trying to do, what the process is. Because even though the language of amends is quite common for people like us, A lot of people don't use that word, and a lot of people don't know what it means, and a lot of people maybe only know about AA or 12-step because of, an episode of Law and Order SVU, and they maybe didn't get the complete picture and don't know what it is. So what I want to do is I want to reach out to that person. I'll stop the share for now, and I'll bring it back up as we continue on. And the first thing is I got to find them. So I gotta find them. And this is one of the only places in which I am going to say Facebook stalking, A-okay. You got to find them where you can find them. You find their email, find them on Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Snapchat, Tinder would be a weird place, but hey, sometimes God moves the way God moves. You know what I'm saying? LinkedIn, I've helped sponsees find people on LinkedIn. And so whatever way I have to get a hold of them, I want to reach out and send them a message. And you can use whatever language that you'd like, but I'll give you some examples of what it can sound like to send that approach message. First, it could look a little something like, as you might know, I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and part of the process of getting well asks that I reflect upon my life. And in so doing, it became incredibly apparent that I caused you harm. I would like to, if you would allow me, the opportunity to sit down with you and make things right. Now, we don't have to tell them we're in AA. I will say there is an advantage to mentioning we're in recovery. And the advantage is, and I only know this advantage after I make amends. I don't know it before. But the advantage is how God moves in the amends process. Often, not all the time, but there is more often than not, or at least a surprising amount, a 9th step can turn into a 12-step call. How often we make amends and somebody says, my son's struggling with drinking, or I've got a loved one, or, a coworker that's struggling. Would you be open to talking to them? And so that's where there's value in explaining this is what I'm doing in that I am in Alcoholics Anonymous. But if you don't feel comfortable, if that's not what you're open to, that's okay. I'm not, as long as you'll make the amends, I'm not gonna, I'm picking my battles, Another way we can say it is simply, I've been reflecting upon my life. And it's been really apparent that I caused you a lot of harm. If you'd be open, I'd like to sit down and have a conversation where I try to make things right. And that's what we're gonna do in the approach. Now, in that approach, those are just some examples of what it could look like, what it could sound like. When I sit down with my sponsees, I also help them with the approach. So I'm going to sit down with them. We're going to write out the amends together, and then I'm going to sit with them as they send out the approach. You know why? Because if they say, no, I'll do it later this week, it's not getting done. So I'm sitting with them and holding their hand, even if it's a virtual hand holding, I'm hand holding, I'm there with you. We're going to send that approach together. And, a lot of times in the approach, we have certain amount of fear. For example, I always use this as the example because I think it's funny. For example, let's say there's a major holiday and we are at our amends. We can acknowledge that. So, for example, we can say, hey, I know it's Arbor Day, and you wouldn't be surprised the holidays that we'll grab a hold on and be like, no, I can't reach out to them. It's Arbor Day. I think that was in April. So Arbor Day is past. we just love our trees. But I know Arbor Day can be a busy time for a lot of people and a lot of families. So now is not a good time, we could schedule for when it's better, or if you would be comfortable, I can reach out later again. And so we can acknowledge the thing that we're afraid of. Another thing is, let's say we're making amends to an ex. There's that fear. Are they going to think that I just want to get back together with them because I am that special and interesting, Or maybe they've remarried or in a new relationship. Guess what? In the approach message, we can acknowledge that. We can say, hey, I'm reaching out for an amends, and we can explain what that is, where we discuss where I've caused harm. I want to be clear, I'm not trying to reopen things or cause any further harm, and I want you to know that I'm incredibly respectful of the relationship that you're in. You see, a lot of the fear we have around amends is just not knowing how to communicate, which, I'm not throwing shade at anyone. That's me. That is me before I make an amends. I'm like, but it's Arbor Day. I can't, or it's Labor Day. You can't make amends after Labor Day. It's not like wearing white. It's fine. It's fine. You can make amends, whatever. So that communication is key. And then as somebody who's been sober kind of through COVID and in this post-Zoom era, that illuminated some stuff for me that I came from a school where, my sponsor at the time was, it is eyeball to eyeball, face to face. That's the only way that you could make amends. And actually I'll share this. I remember at the time I was working with a woman who was on parole. And so not probation, but parole. And so she had very strict limitations on where she could travel. And she had a lot of amends that she needed to make in Saskatchewan, which I know for most of you is like, I just made up a mythical place, the capital of which is Regina. So now you think I'm just pulling your leg. Liz knows what's up, though. She knows I'm not making it up. And then Saskatoon's another city there. They got a place called Moose Jaw. Anywho, she had a lot of amends to make a province over. So think like the next state over, and she wasn't allowed to travel. And I remember feeling like, man, like if we could just make these amends, even if they would be imperfect. Well, later on when COVID hit, there were people who were and even when COVID hit and the world started to reopen, I noticed that there were people who were very, very comfortable. Yes, let me be around people. And other people who were not comfortable for whatever reason. And during that period of time, what I learned is the value of asking, basically consent, spoilers, asking what methodology would be best for you. And that's something I really stand by today. If I would love to meet you in person, so let's aim for that. Let's aim for that highest level of like, yikes, I'd rather not, Paige. Why are we aiming for that? And offer, like, if there's another way that you would prefer, I would be open as well. If you'd prefer a phone call, or if it was something that was particularly difficult and I created a lot of harm and they would prefer me to send it over text or via email so that they can read it and process it and respond, I'll do that as well. And I can offer those things. And why I'm so big on this is because I've seen a lot of times where we are held back by it has to be face to face, and that amends doesn't get made. And it's so much better to just make progress, make imperfect progress, and then we can go on an amends tour. I had a sponsee where I was like, listen, I will make you a shirt. Like, you know how bands, when they travel, they have their like tour shirts? I'm like, I will make you an amends shirt. If you go make all your amends, I'll have the dates and all. I've offered to do that a couple times, actually. So the offer still stands. And again, the lens into my sponsorship, it's bribery. I will bribe people to do work, apparently, with knickknacks and trinkets and things that people don't need, but whatever will get you to do it. So we make that approach. And last week, as I was speaking about working with others and building that willingness, I find it really effective to send between 5 and 10 approaches in one sitting. Now, if you've not made amends yet, it's like, girl, you are out of your mind, which that two things can be true. I am out of my mind, and that's a good suggestion. I contain multitudes. But what we're afraid of is that I'm going to reach out to like 10 people, and all at once, they're all going to say, why, yes, I'd like to make an amends with you over the phone right now. I will let you know that doesn't happen. I'll just let you know that doesn't happen. We kind of live in a bit of a ghosting culture, in a bit of a, left on red and a little bit of that. And people are busy and people don't get, back to us right away. So that's what I found really effective, to really just get us into it and to overcome that fear of it. And I will say, after we send the approach messages, it's completely normal to have your pre-amends digestive issues, the twisties and the resisties. And hey, listen, I will say, if you ever get a little blocked up, I'm not a doctor, but I will say there's 2 things that'll get you unclogged. Again, not a doctor, don't take this as medical advice. Although I did write a couple of my own prescriptions. That's outside issues, outside tissues. I will focus. But Two things that'll get you unplugged: AA coffee and making that amends you don't want to make. That's what'll get things moving again. So that is completely normal. But when we're in it, man, it is so much more liberating and so much more freeing. So we want to send out those approach messages, and the things that we feel unsure about, we can say, hey, you might not. And so, like, let's say it's somebody who was very upset. We can acknowledge, you might not want to ever hear from me again. If that's the case, I will respect that as well. Whatever I'm sort of afraid of to acknowledge, I can acknowledge in the approach, which again, you have no idea how much like work in amends it took me to realize, oh, I could just communicate, wild. All right, now let's go to the very bottom of page 77, and we're going to talk about the second part of the amends process. Bottom of 77, it says, under no condition do we criticize such a person or argue. So what is important is the posture of my heart. What they did at this moment does not matter. We are just trying to clean up the mess that we made, to sweep up our side of the street. It says, simply, we tell them that we will never get over drinking until we have done our utmost to straighten out the past. That we are there to sweep off our side of the street, realizing that nothing worthwhile can be accomplished until we do so. Never trying to tell him what he should do. His faults are not discussed. We stick to our own. And it says, if our manner is calm, frank, and open. Now, we talk a whole lot about happy, joyous, and free, and we ought to. We weren't living a whole lot of happy, joyous, and free before we got here. And man, I know what it is like to live a life completely void or devoid of happy, joyous, and free. But to get there, I need to show up in this manner of calm, frank, and open. So calm that I'm showing up with that energy. Now, we will be nervous, and that is okay, and we'll talk about things to help with the nerves. But to be frank, to be clear, to be concise, and to be open, to have that open heart, to not be guarded in the amends process. So when we talk about discussing our faults, that's where, and I'm going to do the screen share again, this is where we come back to the fourth step process in step 9. I could have said it better or said it different. There's 4 steps to the 9th step. We got the approach. We booked the time. Oh, and just really clearly, I want to be super abundantly clear. When we book a time that works best for them, and we show up on time. Like, I really want to emphasize this. I'll talk a little bit, if I remember to do so, about I learned so much about amends by receiving terrible amends. So I had somebody that owed me an amends and was reached out to make an amends. And part of the harm that was caused was not respecting my time, to which she wanted me to do the amends at a really inconvenient time, like at near the end of a really stacked day, and right before I had to do like a 40-minute talk. And I was like, and she's like, well, sounds like you're not willing. I'm like, girl, I didn't do the harm, come on. So let's be considerate about the other person, about their time, and show up on time. Now, the second thing is I want to focus on what I did. Their faults are not discussed. I stick to my own. And I want to be specific when applicable. And I always want to bring it back to my defects of character. And so that is a lot of what I write out with my sponsees when we work together. We write that out. And where we get the information on that is we can get a lot of the information from the 4th column of resentments. We can also get a lot of that information from the 2nd and 3rd column of sex inventory. That's where we can get some of that information for the amends and to put into that second part. Now, I say when applicable. So what I mean by that is I had somebody make an amends to me, and I still think this is funny. And I think I shared this the other week, where she reached out to make an amends, where she's like, Paige, I was really judging you a whole lot. And that was her amends. And fair enough. I get why, girl. But we can see how that might not be the most helpful and how that could cause more harm. So I don't when it's something like that, I don't want to be, unless it was like obvious in how I behaved and how I treated them. I don't want to say things like, I was gossiping a whole lot about you. How I like to amend gossiping is I say kind things to their face, and I say kind things about them behind their back, and I build momentum with doing that. That's how I like to amend that. And so I'm also big on writing it out. I had another person make an amends to me, where she was like, she, started the amends, and she's like, oh, and I'd like to make an amends for, oh, no, not that. And I can't tell you how much willpower it took to not be like, no, girl, you got to tell me what that was. Cause I just had, I will leave it. So having it written out can be so incredibly helpful. And we can read from it because, it is nerve-wracking. It is nerve-wracking to make amends. You see, I'm showing up to the amends in a position of humility, which is also a position of vulnerability. I will say, though, if people are willing to sit down with you and hear your amends, it's usually going to go okay. They're going to tell you to F off in the reaching out stage, just from my experience. But we're afraid and we're nervous. And so it is helpful to have it written out and to bring that to the amends. You don't have to read off it like a script, and it's also okay if you do. And my suggestion around that is if we're feeling really nervous and like we need to read off from the script, we can acknowledge, hey, I just want you to know I wrote out the amends and I might read from it. And the reason I'm doing this is not because it's not from my heart, but the reason I'm doing this is because this amends is important to me. And I want to make sure I don't forget anything. And so we can be very transparent. And so what does it mean when I say we discuss the harm and then tie it back to the defect of character? Well, if you guys remember, I always have that little that example that I use of like, hey, I slept with your husband, I stole your car, and I peed on your carpet. And then I say, hey, it was linoleum, pew pew. So when we get to amends, I do think it's kind of funny to bring it around full circle and make amends for that behavior. I know, some of that's some heavy stuff. So here's what the amends would look like. Let's say those were the harms. The first thing that is on my heart to amend is, and I should probably start with the husband. So I sometimes build to that in the when I do the example. But the first thing that is on my heart to amend is engaging with your husband in a way like we're assuming the person knows. We're not just going to blow things up if they don't know. So I got into the amends. I'm like, wait a minute, I should make sure we have caveats to this amends. So this person knows. When I slept with your husband, that was incredibly dishonest. It was a betrayal of trust. And I acted in a way that betrayed our friendship and our relationship. And that was wrong. You did not deserve to be treated like that. And just to talk about the amends in the middle of making it, sometimes we have that desire to say, I'm sorry in the amends process. And it's not the end of the world if I'm sorry slips out. In fact, there are people in our lives that need to hear contrition because they didn't see contrition in our words and our actions. But what is more powerful than I am sorry is that was wrong. You did not deserve that. That sort of language carries more weight. And again, when I stole your car, that was another example of my entitlement, my selfishness, and my dishonesty. And when I peed on your carpet, then do not laugh when you're doing it. We got to be stone-faced with that one. So you might want to practice. But when I peed on your carpet, again, that was selfish. You see, I'm an alcoholic, and that is no excuse for my behavior. But what happens is once I start to drink, I can't control the amount that I take. And I have a responsibility to treat the illness that is my alcoholism so that I don't take that first drink and I don't set off that allergy and I'm not, causing a mess in your home. And I was negligent and complacent and I didn't treat my alcoholism. And as a result, that hurt you. And again, that was wrong. Listen, I'm just going to add a little spice to this amends. And then when I booked it out of there and pretended like it was the dog that did it, that was another example of my dishonesty and not taking accountability for my actions. And I'd like to do so now. So I like to do that in a full circle way because I think it's fun to do that. So that's the example. I start with the harm and I tie it back to the defective character. And so when I work with my sponsees, sometimes they'll have amends that aren't in their 4th step, or it's taking them a little bit too long to find it in their 4th step and your girl gets a little impatient. Just joking. But one of the things that we can do is I can say, all right, what's the first thing that you want to amend? And they'll tell me the thing that they did. And often when I help people with amends, because my attention span is not what it used to be, and at no point has it ever been good, I do voice to text, because a lot of times I'll say something and people will be like, oh, that was good. What was that? And I completely forgot. And the first one's always the best one. So I voice to text. I'm just sharing that because that's just something that a helpful tool that I've found that works for my brain when I'm working with sponsees, and can be helpful when you're working on your amends. So, and you're working with your sponsees. And so they'll share with me the first thing that's on their heart to amend, and I'll tie it. I'll say this, all right, the first thing that I'd like to amend is this, and then I tie it back into defects of character for them. Whether that behavior was selfish, dishonest, entitled, that we were wearing masks and having walls, and we weren't authentic and transparent, and as a result we didn't allow the relationship to flourish, for example. All these different ways I tie it back. And so when we've got that part written out, awesome. That's awesome, because that's going to be the bulk of the amends. And I think I spoke about this last week, but one of the most helpful ways in building willingness is writing out the amends. Because a lot of times I'll work with people, and man, I've worked with a lot of people, not even just sponsees, because I talk a lot about amends, and I'll help you with your amends. So people will be like, help. And I'm like, I gotcha. And so, I show up and we'll talk about an amends. And, a lot of times it's like, man, we're so afraid of the amends. And I'm like, well, what if it sounded like this? And I'll do a little voice to text as a suggestion of what we could say. And it's like, oh yeah, I could say that. I could do that. And putting it on paper, getting it out and seeing what it could look like often takes a lot of the fear out of it. And then I have it and I'm ready to go. And so that means that's plenty of time. So let's send that approach message. Pew, pew, let's get going. Let's get moving with it. And it's just helpful to have. And so what's the next step? So when we sit down with the person in our amends process, what we'll do is we'll then read out or say from memory, from our heart, what we did, being specific when applicable and focusing on our defects of character. We're not discussing the other person. And then the third part of the amends process is to ask, is there any other way in which I've harmed you? And we can phrase that a number of different ways. I like to use sort of language that is, it was not my intention to leave anything out, but I am aware that there might be other ways in which I've harmed you that you need to share with me. Or we can even offer, if you need to share with me about how my actions made you feel. And the most important part of this third section of step 9 is we listen. We zip our mouths and open our ears and we listen. We don't, my best friend for many, many years, you know how you have fights and you have disagreements, and my best friend made an amends to me one time. And as my friend was doing the second part, started to get into, but you did that. And I was like, oh, that's not how we format this. So it's important that we zip it. And because here's the thing. If I want to get a lens into how my defects of character affect others, if I want to get a lens into how my alcoholism affects others, if I want to get a lens into the freedom that I need to have from these defects of character, this is where I can get it. They will tell me things. And a lot of times it's things that I didn't even think of. Or maybe I was blacked out or didn't remember. But sometimes the way we hurt others are things that we didn't think twice about. And if it is true for them, it's true. We just listen and we receive it. And then what we do is the fourth step. The fourth part of step 9, I'm trying to avoid saying steps in case it gets confusing for people. Like, what do you mean fourth step? I thought we're on step 9. I'm trying to make it simple and I'm making it more confusing. But the fourth section of the 9th step is I ask, what can I do to make it right? What can I do to make it right? And guess what? I do that. I then do that. And after I do that, that is when the amends is made. And I don't mean to spoil it for you guys. For those that haven't made amends, most of the time it's keep doing what you're doing. But an interesting thing about keep doing what you're doing is that means that I need to continue to do this way of life. You see, when I continue to pray, to meditate, to work with others, to take my inventory, to show up, that is continuing this way of life. This is continuing, keep doing what you're doing. It is a promise that I made I would do in the 9th step, amends. So just, an additional like, hey, we got to keep going. We got to keep moving. We can't stop here. But that's the process. Now, I will say, if, for example, and we'll talk about what happens if I owe money. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But if I owe somebody money, I don't want to just show up with eloquent words. I want to show up with their money, not my money, their money, and at least some of it, and a payment plan if I can't give all of it. And I actually, while I'm on this tangent, I kind of like when I've had financial amends, and I've mostly had financial amends to an institution, what I want to do is I want to like be Scrooge McDuck, and I want to have like a bag of gold coins, and I want to drop it on the table, and I want to be like, paid off, amended, pew, yeah. And that's not always possible. That's not always feasible. And so it can be really, and for when we owe financial amends to family members, there can be significant spiritual value in making consistent payments, because I was never consistent in my life before. So we show up with at least some money, and we can figure out a payment plan to pay them off. Pay them back, not pay them off, pay them back. It's their money. And there are times where an amends is apparent. What I mean by that is like there are some times where it's obvious what I should do to make it right, and I can offer that. But I also think it's helpful to ask. Yeah, the spiritual currency. I actually did a whole talk on the economy of grace where I talk about that spiritual currency. If somebody reminds me, I'll put that in the chat later. Focus! That attention span I don't have. But by and large, it can be helpful to allow somebody to tell me how I can make it right. And so we're going to have different types of amends. And actually, I was going to we'll go through it. The first type of amends that we often owe, other than those very clear, direct amends, is those financial amends. So on page 78, the second full paragraph, what happens is we get into some of these specifics. So the next specific is most alcoholics owe money. What? What? I am shocked. Alcoholics being unresponsible with credit and borrowing money? What? Who would have thought? It gives us the direction. We do not dodge our creditors. Telling them what we are trying to do, we make no bones about our drinking. So again, going and making that direct amends. And it says they usually know it anyways, whether we think so or not. Yeah, like the bank tellers, they can tell when it's like liquor store, cash withdrawal, ATM, cash withdrawal, ATM. They can figure out what's happened. It's not a mystery. And it says, nor are we afraid of disclosing our alcoholism on the theory that it may cause financial harm. Approached in this way, the most ruthless creditor will sometimes surprise us. Now, this is a direction, arranging the best deal we can. We let these people know we are sorry. Sorry by itself would not be an amend, but we're going to pay them back. That's part of the process. Our drinking has made us slow to pay. We must lose our fear of creditors. for no matter how far we have to go, for we are liable to drink if we have to face them. And so a helpful thing that we can do as it pertains to financial amends is to, on our 8-step list, if we owe money, is to put a guesstimated amount or get the actual amount and put it down that we owe so that we can see it on paper. Because when we see it on paper, it often just becomes... it's just so clear. You know what I mean? Because, when you have, and I know nobody here knows what it's like to not be doing well financially and to owe financial amends and have the money, the amount spinning around in your brain and just going and going and going. Getting it on paper helps it to be manageable. Now, this is something, it's not in the book, but I found it to be really helpful when it comes to financial amends. And it's something that's known as a debt snowball. So what we want to do is we want to make at least a minimum payment on all our financial amends. And then what we want to do is we want to start attacking the smallest debt first. So the least amount that I owe. So if I owe, let's say, $10,000, $1,000, $500, and $50, what I want to do is I want to try to pay off that $50 first. And then when that's paid off, I can take the minimum payment and that extra and put it on the $500. And then when that's paid off, put it on the $1,000. And it just helps to build just momentum with it. And I've heard and have found that to be helpful as a way of like approaching it and building momentum. And you know me, I'm all about momentum. So, and this, when it says you do not dodge our creditors, I always remember there was a guy, this was many, many years ago, and it was at my home group at the time, and he answered his phone. And he said, Boston Pizza Calgary, how can I help you? And I'm like, this guy did not work at Boston Pizza. I was like, what? And I was kind of like, what was that? And he's like, oh, he didn't say I'm dodging my creditors, but he was like, yeah, it was, creditors, and that is dodging our creditors. So what we want to do is we want to reach out to them. Don't worry, they'll find us too. Answer some of those phone calls. And it does say arrange the best deal we can. We're not trying to go under financially. We're not trying to, force ourselves to live our lives as ascetics living on a mountaintop with renouncing all like worldly goods because we can't afford things. We want to have it so that we're not drowning, so we're not overwhelming ourselves. And we can often do that when it comes to creditors because they'll take something over nothing. And so see what you can reasonably afford to pay back that's not going to overwhelm you financially so you can make rent and eat and live and that sort of stuff. Maybe even come to Ladybug Roundup. See, I was trying to do the announcements in the middle of the thing. I'm doing my best. And so we do that. And that's how we lose the fear of them because we're on top of it. And if we start really approaching financial amends in that way, that it's less likely to get worse when I'm on top of like, it is their money back. They don't want my money. They want their money back. And more than that, when I start to approach my finances through the lens of it's not my money, it's God's money. That changes how I spend. That changes what I do with it. And it's just, and you don't have to resonate with that if that does not float your boat, you don't got spiritual buoyancy with that one, don't you worry about it. But I found it really helpful and when I've worked with people who struggled with their finances. Now, at the very bottom of page 78, it talks about perhaps we have committed a criminal offense. Now, last week on page 79, we spoke about, although these reparations take innumerable forms, first full paragraph on page 79, there are some general principles which we find guiding. And it spoke about, hey, remember at the very beginning, we said we would go to any lengths, and then we had another prayer for willingness, where it says, God, I ask that I be given strength and direction to do the right thing. No matter what the personal consequences may be, help me to be willing to not shrink at anything. I take that prayer and I build that momentum. Now, I know that you good, law-abiding, upstanding alcoholics would never have done anything illegal. But I'll tell you my experience. Genuinely, it's weird. I was never a shoplifter. Which is not to say that I would steal my brother's alcohol and stuff like that. Keep it in the family. But I want you to know I am weird for not being a shoplifter. Like, I have really rigid black and white thinking, and I'm like, oh, that's not mine, I'm not going to take it. But I've worked with a lot of people who, for example, owed shoplifting amends. And so what I have found to be the best, most effective way is to reach out to the store. Now, here's where I give a little bit of grace, because we're all afraid. I'm going to go and I'm going to get arrested and they're going to kick me out forever. I'm like, okay, let's call the store then. So a lot of times I get we'll call the store, because they're then not going to track you down for things you shoplifted 40 years ago. It's not that big a deal, but we'll help with the fear. And then, and actually, I'll tell you fully transparently, here's how it'll go. And I've had to do this for different things. Like when I vote amends to companies and organizations, I'll reach out to them and I'll explain the situation. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and part of me staying well is making amends for the harms that I've caused. Now, if you shoplifted, you could say, over the years I shoplifted. I would estimate it's about this much money, and I would like to find a way to make it right. And what they will say is, I don't know how to deal with this. Let me get a hold of my manager, who will get on the phone with you and will be equally confused and unsure. And typically they will say, I don't know. Sometimes they will say, we would like you to pay back that as a charitable donation to our company's charity. But a lot of times they're like, I don't know what to deal with. I don't know how to deal with this. It's fine. Don't worry about it. And then what happens is it can be then helpful to, let's say, because a lot of people would shoplift from, stores like Walmart or, places grocery stores, for example. So where we can make amends is make sure we're intentional about spending that money giving to a local food bank. Or let's say, I know nobody here as a teenager would steal mascara from what is it, Woolworths? Did they have mascara there? That's no longer in business. It's yeah. So what can we do? I think it's always important to make the direct amends and then do the paying back in another way. So you can give that money to teenagers that are at risk, teens that are maybe in the foster care system, people that who were similar in age that maybe didn't have some of the things that we had, That's how we can do it. But I found it important to make that direct amends first, because if I only I'm just going to give to the food bank, there's often that lingering, I haven't quite made the amends, and you come to a meeting where some stupid page is talking about the stupid amends, and we feel it in our gut and in our stomach. It's all right, I'll go make a direct amends. And then sometimes they'll be like, yeah, you can make a donation to our charitable organization, and then you got to pay it back twice. So, hey, listen, I'm just trying to streamline this process. So that's an example. And really what it is about being as willing as we possibly can be when it comes to criminal things. And there are times where, we have to, bite the bullet and face the full ramification of perhaps legal consequences. And it does tell us, hey, there are some times where it's best to just try to give back to the community, because we wouldn't be able to provide for our families and our loved ones. So it does, where I need to be at the nth degree is willingness. And then we work with our sponsors to find a God-centered way through. So after that, we'll go to the very bottom of page 80. Now, I know you guys aren't going to relate to this. It says, chances are we have domestic troubles. An alcoholic having domestic troubles? Can you believe it? I've never heard of such a thing. So it's going to give us two sets of directions. The first set of directions is going to be on how do we make amends when there has been infidelity it's implied that hasn't been found out, undiscovered infidelity. And then the other directions are how do we make amends otherwise, because infidelity is not the only way that we cause harm. So when it comes to infidelity, this is often, like, this is a part of the book that I find a lot of people sometimes struggle with. I'm somebody that I've been cheated on. Again, I'm very literal and I have a black and white thinking, so I didn't cheat on anyone else. But, I'm somebody that's been cheated on, and we can kind of read this and be thinking like, Bill, is this the only place you were finding an easier, softer way? Come on. Because it's sort of, it sort of seems a little like soft, like if they know in a general way, should we tell her? Well, not always, we think. But what we're trying to navigate, just to contextualize this whole discussion and this part of the book that I'm sort of glossing over. I'm not breaking down line by line just because I've got like 10 minutes left and I've got an eye on the time and I'm just doing my best to be on top of that. So I'm glossing over it. But as we contextualize this, infidelity creates trauma. Like, there is a specific type of trauma that occurs when somebody has been cheated on. It's what's known as betrayal trauma, where it's like our trust has been broken. And so what I know to be true is that we don't want to cause further harm. And there are times where the right thing to do for a number of reasons is to lay it completely on the table and say, this is what I did, and this was wrong. And you didn't deserve that. And then going through that process. And then there are times where to do so would cause so much more harm to the other person. It's not about harm to us and our relationship, because I've already created the harm. But an interesting thing is many people, I have worked with people who have been unfaithful. I remember I sponsored a gal who stepped out on her marriage, and her husband did know. And I think about her, and I hold her in my heart quite a lot, because even though he knew, and even though he completely forgave her, she was so racked with that guilt and that shame. And when that anxiety is so bad you're dry heaving, that's where she was about it. And so, there's times where, at bottom 81, 82, top 82, if we can forget, so can she. It's like, that's perhaps a little insensitive. But I just want to offer the context of those that are able to, have a tremendous amount of shame. And what it's trying to say is that we want to move through this in a way that doesn't create more harm. And so there are times where, if there has been infidelity, it's sometimes better to talk about it in a more general way. Some hard and fast rules is we don't want to throw anyone else under the bus. And that we want to have, and actually we spoke about this last week on page 82, where it says, each might pray about it, having the other one's happiness uppermost in mind. So I'm praying to navigate this situation with the idea of what would be best for the other person. Not what's best for me, but for the other person. And even though that is specific directions about a specific situation, I've really found that to be the best course in so many areas of our life. To come to prayer, to come to meditation, and to ask what would be best for this other person. And so that is helpful. Now, the directions that we then have for what if there is no infidelity. And sort of some of the directions around infidelity I use with things like gossip or judgment if the other person didn't know. Where it's like just to say, hey, I was talking a lot about you, or I judged you, or I didn't like you. That's often more harmful if they didn't know. So why would I cause that harm? But we can address that in a more indirect way. For example, I wasn't always the friend that you needed me to be. That sort of indirect way is a good way of addressing it. And then we address it indirectly, very specifically being kind to their face and behind their back. And that's how I found really helpful to deal with it. So what if there is no infidelity? Is there no amends to make? Top of page 83. The very first paragraph where it says, yes, there is a long period of reconstruction ahead. And if I do well on time, which is looking like I might not, I'll reference that long period of reconstruction. It says we must take the lead. So when it comes to our family members, our loved ones, those that are closest to us, that reconstruction is that rebuilding, that restoring, again, far more than simply my bad home slice. My bad home slice probably should not at any point be on an amends. I didn't want to speak in absolutes because maybe there's a time it's appropriate. I will say my best friend, when you're really close with somebody, we're both in recovery. And there were the times we get into a fight. And I remember one day there was a spider in the bathroom and I was like, hey, I know I owe you an amends, but instead, do you just want to name the bathroom spider? And so we were very happy to have Stuart. But essentially what we're trying to do is we need to take the lead. A remorseful mumbling that we are sorry won't fit the bill at all. So what we've got to do is restore, repair, rebuild. And it says we ought to sit down we ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as we now see it, being very careful not to criticize them. So again, that's that second part of the amends process where I sit down, and I find it best to do individually because then you're not going to have the whole family teaming up on you, Oh yeah, you did that to Aunt Susan. You did that to me too. Just one at a time. And because it gives them the opportunity to say things they might not be able to say around other people. But it says we ought to frankly analyze the past as we now see it, being very careful not to criticize them. So what I want to do is I want to show up and I want to be honest about what my harms were and tie them back into those defects of character. And then I love this because it's our family, and our family, man, especially family of origin, those are the ones that push our buttons because they're the ones that installed them, think about making amends family origin, and it's like their defects may be glaring. And here's the book meeting us where we're at and taking us where we need to go. But the chances are our own actions are partially responsible. Womp, womp. Oh man, it's a reaction to my actions. All right. So we clean house with the family. So what we do is we sit down and we make those direct amends with our loved ones. And then we continue to demonstrate the change. We continue to show up. Be a present, loving parent. Be a present, loving spouse. Be a present, loving child. Reach out. Be there for them. That isn't to say all families aren't easy, and that isn't to say, hey, sometimes we're going to need boundaries. No, I can't be there every day of the week, But we find that way that we can rebuild, repair, and restore. And it says asking each morning in meditation, which tells us that this is going to be daily. It's going to take a while to repair, to restore, to rebuild. That it says that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. And I love that idea of, it's like the St. Francis prayer. What I'm trying to do is get me out of the way and let this power flow through me. That's what I'm trying to do. And I do that on a daily basis. And I've got to keep doing that on a daily basis. And how I do that is step 10. Now, if I was done talking, that would be a wonderful segue into next week. And I'd be done early, but I'm not done yet. 1 second, almost. So what about these? So let's skip down. It talks about the spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. So we need to demonstrate this change. But go down a paragraph below that when it says there are some wrongs we can never fully right. We don't worry about them. If we could say to ourselves, we would write them if we could. Some people cannot be seen. We send them an honest letter, and there may be valid reason for postponement in some cases, very few. But what I want to point out is, how do we make amends? For example, to somebody that has passed on. And this is one of those places where writing a letter can be helpful. And also, last week, Vivian was talking about, some people they're not open. And so writing them a letter, and there's a thing you can do where you send a letter where they have to sign for it. And that's how you know they got it. And then you can be like, I am done. But yeah, send the letter. But when we talk about somebody who has passed on, there's a number of things that we can do. The first thing we can do is what's known as a graveside amends. And even if we don't know where they're buried or where they were cremated, we could go to a place that is significantly meaningful for them and that relationship, and we can read out the amends. And that, for a lot of people, is really healing. but there are sometimes we need more. And so for sometimes what we can do is, let's say we owed amends to somebody who's passed on who just had a tremendous love of animals. What we can do is we can volunteer at a local animal shelter in their name. Or let's say they loved reading. Well, we could make a little free library, and in their honor, or donate time to the local library in their honor. And something else that we could do, again, if those options just don't feel like we've gotten clear, gotten free, is what is known as a surrogate amends. And that's where we find somebody, let's say it was like a mother or grandmother, we find somebody that is a little matronly in Alcoholics Anonymous, and we ask them to sit and receive that amends. So we get the process of going through that. And I've helped connect people for surrogate amends, because there's times we've hurt people that groups of people, ones that we couldn't find, and somebody sits in and receives that amends, and that can also be incredibly healing. And so with the eye on the time, what I will end on is we don't have time to read through the 9th step promises, but what I want us to understand is those 9th step promises, they happen when we are about halfway through our amends, when we are doing this deal. So if I want that freedom, and I talk a lot, not at this one because we don't have time, but how the 9th step promises line up with the bedevilments. If I want freedom, if I want to get rocketed into the 4th dimension, I got to make those amends that I don't want to make. So I'll leave it there and I'll toss it over to you, Vivian.